Hi, everybody. This is Andrew Edmonds here again with GeoNexus, and I'm going to be going through a quick demo on some of the beginning steps for configuring a GIP integration between GIS and Maximo. So this software, GIP, is something that is installed on-prem, and when we install it, it needs to be able to connect to our edge systems. So in this case, we're going to be connecting to Maximo and to GIS. And after you've installed it, then you can navigate to the installation folder, which is typically under Apps, go to your build, and launch the GUI. Once we have our GUI launched, it takes a few seconds to come up sometimes. That's normal. Once it's been launched, you can see we have here the graphic user interface for the GeoNexus integration platform. So right off the bat, we have our project folder right here, and one of the cool features with GIP is being able to actually manage multiple projects. So if you had multiple, I guess, organizations or groups of data within the user group that might be using this product for a single machine or a single instance, you can have various projects put together with your different connections right here. So once we crack open our project, we can see the console and our reports options. These are the top two tabs here, and the console is pretty much how we would do our press play option. So once everything is configured and we want to run a synchronization between the edge systems, the console is where you can manually hit Start Synchronizer. Alternatively, you can configure the Windows Task Scheduler to run this on a schedule. So if you wanted to synchronize it every night, you could do it, once every 24 hours. You could do it once a week. However best fits your organization's need for synchronizing the data. The reports folder right here, we've got a link to the file location for it. And if I had any reports in here, this is where I would be able to double-click one and pull them up. They come up as PDFs. You can launch it with Chrome, or view it with Chrome, rather. And that gives you a description of all of the data that gets synchronized. And then through the report configuration, we can, actually, I guess it's back through the webinar connection here. We can set our recipients up so that people can get lists of reports, or there are lists of people who can get reports, and you can configure how you want those reports to be delivered and who gets what report. So if there's an error, then you might have a group that is notified when something needs to be resolved, a conflict between one of the two systems, perhaps. Or you could just have successes where every success report just goes straight to, another maybe automated inbox. But this is where all that configuration would take place, and that's all there to customize how our users can receive the information that is being generated by the product. So a little bit closer to the task that, or the subject that we were talking about in the webinar here. We've got our project, and we are connecting to our edge system. So this is utilizing the Maximo REST connector, which is what I described earlier as having multiple authentication types and letting us connect to Maximo. Here we have our authentication type down here. You can plug in your user, your password. You can specify port, your connection type being HTTP versus HTTPS. Got all kinds of API context down in here, some certificate management options down here with the checkboxes. And then for our geodatabase connection, well, our Esri connection rather, this is configured using a GIS database connection, but we could also add a new connection using enterprise or online services, a SQL workspace. And here we also have more connectors showing up. So once you've configured your connections, you can validate them to make sure that you're able to communicate with your edge systems. Love that validate button. Makes things much easier when we're troubleshooting connections. The value lists are something that I'll come back to a little bit later, but they allow us to perform translations. So they typically get used more once you've actually got a data set that you're configuring. Then you can use a value list to apply a translation, and that value list might apply to multiple data sets, which is why we've got it up here above them, so that multiple groupings of data can use the same translation rules if that's needed. So stepping down here to our data sets, which, as I described earlier in the webinar, that's kind of the high level description of the information that we are going to be synchronizing and grouping data by. So here we have a transformer bank data set, and it's got a GIS definition for a transformer bank and a Maximo definition for a transformer bank, and those are configured in the data sources. So we can click down here. I'm going to actually close all my tabs and open that back up. So here we have our data source. So we can see that I've specified the geodatabase connection. We've got our name for that in there. Other information about the data source on the GIS side, as far as narrowing it down all the way down to the table. And then we can see our unique identifier for this transformer table is the facility ID. Here we've got our transformer source selected. We've got the unique attribute type, which is a field. So potentially we could also calculate fields. So if we wanted to concatenate a field where a GIS record may be uniquely defined by the combination of facility ID and serial number or something like that, we can calculate that and then specify it as a unique identifier for the GIS records. And the same goes for Maximo. So if we look over at the Maximo equation here, we're using our Maximo transformer bank name. We're using the REST connection, which we've defined up here. We've got the location, so that's the type of object that we're configuring within Maximo. We could also configure against many other groupings or objects within Maximo, but locations, assets, service address, meters, these are the more common ones. You specify your org, your site, classification, get down to your primary system ID, and then within the data source configuration right here, that you can specify your foreign keys for Maximo. So in this case, you've got your Maximo transformer attribute, which is the location, which we are aligning against the GIS facility ID. And I've got these reversed. This is the same as this, only backwards. And I don't necessarily need to do that, but what's cool is I can actually use a different pair of keys based on the direction that I'm going. So maybe facility ID can link to location when we're pushing information from GIS to Maximo, but then for the purpose of pushing from Maximo back to GIS, you could actually shift that and use a different set of keys if you're expecting your keys to change, which is pretty flexible, although definitely pretty complicated as well. It's worth thinking out and planning for. So within our data sources, or after configuring our data sources, we can set up our synchronization rules. So when we set up a sync rule, you would add a target. Oh, I've already got these, the target rules built in. So I've got update rules and I've got create rules. If I wanted to add mapping rules that are create, delete, orphan, link, replace, we would be able to set up those rules right in here. So here we have Maximo transformer bank target rules. So this is when the Maximo source here is the target of a change that originates in GIS. In this case, we would be creating records into Maximo as the target based off of something that's happening in GIS. When we see a new record in GIS that has a unique identifier that doesn't have a matching unique identifier in Maximo, we see, oh, there's something in GIS, there needs to be something in Maximo. What are we doing on creates? Well, the created Maximo record will have all of its data source defaults. So things like the organization ID, the site, the classification, all that goes over on default, but any other specific rules for creates, such as taking the comments from a transformer bank and then sending that over to the comment specification in Maximo, this is where you would make those mappings to align your data sources across systems. So you would specify various attributes about the GIS transformer bank. We'll go in here, say GIS transformer bank. We'll look at a field. We've got whatever our source field might be, say feeder, and then this would be going, again, as a Maximo target. So we're at a Maximo transformer bank location. We can look at maybe its attributes. We could say we're aligning the feeder ID to go over to the one here. There's not. Maybe it would be in a spec, but this would be where you'd specify your type of field that you want to align from GIS over to Maximo. There we go. We've got a spec for it. And here you can toggle whether it's enabled or disabled, and the report only would determine whether or not the sync actually fires, or if you just want it to show up in a report, as this is what might happen. And then going the opposite direction, we have update rules from Maximo back to GIS as the target. And here we can see, we can access the Maximo attributes and specs and calculated values and related values and send those back to GIS depending on how our field is aligned. Now, earlier I mentioned the value lists and how I'd return to those. This is where they come in. So, for example, here we have status, which is mapping to the GIS construction status field. And Maximo, if most of our Maximo users here ought to be familiar with Maximo statuses, you typically have things like operating and in service and ready or not ready or decommissioned, whatever the status may be. There's a coded value domain for those statuses where you have a certain list of available statuses that you might have to draw from, and then sometimes you're trying to line that up with a GIS field that may not have those exact values. So like this, we've got a construction status field, and it's running through a status translation. So here is what that status value list translation might look like. So in this hypothetical scenario here, the construction status in GIS would be Boolean on 0 is not working or 1 is working. Well, here we can say, all right, if it's operating or ready or in service in Maximo, we're going to send that to GIS as a 1. Or if it's in repair or out of service, we can send it to GIS as a 0. Same goes for manufacturers if you wanted to go the other way from GIS to Maximo. And really, the method or the direction for which system is applying these is not going to be super important. The important is aligning your from and your to values so that whichever system is sending this value of ABB, we're going to send ABB/Westinghouse to its target destination. And so it's pretty easy to flip these value lists, and these value lists gives us the ability to accommodate for GIS and Maximo both storing coded value domains where sometimes the value that a user sees is different from what actually gets stored in the database. And we can accommodate that so that all of the translations are properly applied. But that is all I wanted to show for the demo of doing some quick alignments, showing how you might specify your data set. Right here, we've got our data set, define our data sources, and then choose some update and create rules for synchronizing records across systems. Thank you very much.